Okay, in this video, I'm going to explain how to draw a plan Rhino. And I'm not really going to draw a full plan, but I'm just going to explain some of the best tools and techniques for doing it in a kind of step-by-step process. So like I explained in the previous video, I've got my layers panel open, I got my properties panel open, I'm in top view here. So I have that one maximized. And I've also set up my units so that I'm in feet. If you don't have any of that stuff or you wonder how to do it, you can refer back to the original video. So I'm going to explain some of the ways of drawing lines. Basically, when you draw a plan in 2D in Rhino, you're basically just drawing lines. So over here on the left, I have a bunch of tools that I can use for drawing lines and curves. In Rhino, there's a couple different types of curve. There's like freeform curves that allow you to do curvy stuff, and there's lines and polylines that allow you to do kind of straight lines or segments of straight lines. So for example, if I draw I'll get a line, I can draw by clicking 2 points. I can also draw by typing in a coordinate, so X and Y, and then I can type in another coordinate, or I can type in a distance, and I can click whatever direction I want, 10-foot long line. The other thing that I didn't actually mention too much in the in the previous video is there's a thing called ortho in Rhino, and that stands for orthogonal, like 90-degree angles. And that's so like right now I'm kind of moving my mouse around and I'm able to click really any direction that I want. Now, if I turn on ortho, I will only be able to draw a line at certain angles. I actually have mine set up. Yours will be, I think, 90. You'll only be able to go like in 4 directions. I have mine set up to do every 30 degrees, but in any case, it snaps your lines to a particular direction. So drawing, at 90-degree angles becomes a lot easier because you can just turn on ortho. Now, most of the time, I like to leave ortho off because there's a really easy way to just snap to it temporarily by holding Shift on the on the keyboard. So as I'm holding down Shift, you can see down at the bottom, ortho becomes activated. And so now I'm drawing, only at certain angles. You can see my snap kind of pulled it off of where it was there. So also my view is in off. You see my viewport's in gradient view, command called gradient view. Your Rhino probably looks a little bit more like it has a gray background. This grid here, you can turn it on and off by typing in grid on the command line. Like I said, every time you type in a command, it'll show you a bunch of options. So this one just allows me to change options for the visibility of my grid. So I can say show grid. I'll just click on that. You can also, if you really want to use the command line, which those who know AutoCAD are probably quite used to working that way. There's also like a letter of each option that's underlined. So if I wanted to turn my grid off by typing in the command line, you see show grid is the H is underlined. So I can also hit H, type in H in the command line and press enter, and it'll toggle that option again. That's another way. When I'm done with the command, I can just press enter, get out of it. So now my grid is off and I can do other things. You can also hit escape. You don't want to like complete a command, but you want to like get out of it. Hit escape on the keyboard. That's end up using. So for the most part, I imagine you'll probably end up drawing with kind of rectangles and with polylines. Now, just to explain, there are ways to draw with curves if you want to draw with curve. So there's a couple different forms of curve, or sorry, I should say, there's different tools for drawing curves. If you want to draw a freeform curve, you want to be on one of these 2 options, probably this one, what's called Interpolate Curve. This draws what's called a Bezier spline. And so you can see as I'm clicking points in my viewport, it's kind of creating a line that intersects with the points that I've clicked. Um, if I can also click this other one, which is the actual control points, and now it's drawing a line with kind of these control points weighted, right? So it's drawing a line based on the placement of these points, but not actually through the points. That one's a little harder to use. But the reason I show that is because, again, when I click on any curve, at least when I click on one at a time, I can see the control points of that curve. So all curves are editable. I can move them around. I can move the control points around and I can edit this curve. And you can see that when I click on that curve again, I don't actually get those original points that I clicked to make the curve. I get the control points, which are like floating around the curve. These kind of weighted points through which the line is actually. So that command is called Interp Curve. You'll notice a lot of things in Rhino are abbreviated. A lot of commands are. So rather than interpolate curve, it's Interp Curve CRV. So curve is often abbreviated to CRV. Surface is often abbreviated to SRF, surf, and point is often abbreviated to ET, although no. So like with select point, it's ET. So just watch out for those abbreviations. And so when I'm drawing with Rhino, I have a tool called a polyline. When I draw a polyline, I can draw continuously a series of line segments that are joined together. Now, if I wanted to join this line back to its original start point, and remember I have Smart Track turned on, so I can snap to the end point of my line over here, and I can use the projection of that point, and I can find the orthogonal projection of my line, and then I just return and click on the original point, close it, so it's one loop, one closed loop of a line, and it's joined. It's joined into one thing. So that ends the command and joins the curve. So now you can see when I select this line, this polyline, which just means literally like a a collection of individual line segments that are joined together. You can see I have the control points and but I selected and all these segments are joined and I select them all at once. If I wanted to separate them, I can explode them. So there's a command called explode. You can see up there it says exploded into 9 segments. And now when I select any part of this curve, you can see they're individual. And so they don't act as one anymore if I move and drag them. They're just separate. If I if I rotate one of them, anyway, you get the idea. So I can also join curves by selecting one or more at a time and typing in join. With most of these commands, you'll find there are ways to select things in a certain order. So like I can select this line, type in join, and it'll say, what curves do you want to join? I'll click on a couple, and then I'll press enter, like it says in the command line. So now 3 curves are joined into one. So I didn't have to select them all beforehand. Or I could type in join without selecting anything, and then select some stuff. You get the idea. So just pay attention to the command line, and you'll get prompts for how to like what Rhino is expecting from you to perform its job. And so I'll join these all into one outline again. You can see it actually tells me it's a closed curve, which is can be important for certain reasons. And so now it's all one thing. I can move it around by itself. Let's say I wanted to split it in half though, in a place where I don't have a control point or I don't have a separation between segments. So I can also do a thing called split or trim. So I'll draw another line here. This time I'm just going to use a single line. I'll use the start and end. I'm holding shift to snap to ortho. And importantly, when I want to trim something, especially if it's like a polyline, it has to go all the way through the line. So for example, if I drew my line right there and I tried to trim this, it wouldn't work because it wouldn't know which side of the loop it wants me to trim away, right? Because it's not going all the way through the object. So I want to place it in a way where it's going all the way through the object. Then I'll type in the command trim, and it says select cutting objects. That's the line I just drew. I'll press enter. You can also, by the way, enter is the same as hitting space on the keyboard. It's also the same as right-clicking on your mouse. I do that a lot. And then I don't have to move, back to the keyboard. And then it'll say, what object do you want to trim? So I'll click on one side of it. And you see it just kind of removed everything on one side of my line, or one side of where my line intersects. So I'll hit Control Z to undo that. Now, if I had this same outline and I wanted to just split it into two halves so that I could have one object over here, one over here, but not actually delete half of it, I could type in split. And with split, you select the object you want to split first, and then you select the cutting object, the reverse of trim. And now you can see I have the same shapes, but they're separated into two. So they've been separated into two objects, and I also have like a separate line segment on either side of that line. Yeah, oh yeah, so delete, also you can get to delete by typing in delete in the command line. You can also just hit the button on your keyboard. Now these are open lines, open curves. I can also use the command close curve, and if it can figure it out, it'll close the curve. It'll close the open end of the curve loop, like by making a new line segment. So let's see. Let's say if I wanted to draw a room or something, or like a sequence of rooms, I could draw a rectangle of a certain size. And if I wanted to draw the wall thickness of that room, then I would. One way you can do it is you can just draw another rectangle, and you can, use your snaps to line it up and make sure it's centered around that. The easier way to do it, and I'll make this a rectangle so you can see how this works, is to use a command called offset. So if I type in offset on my command line, now I have a bunch of options. It's saying select the curve, so that's the curve I want to offset. And then I'm getting a preview here of what it's going to do for me. So it's going to basically create a new line perpendicular everywhere to the existing line on the inside or on the outside or on whatever side we hold my mouse. And and it's going to set that at a distance to my original line that I specify. And the same is true, for example, if I drew a curve, a freeform curve. If I were to offset this curve, you can see it's making another curve that's exactly that distance away from it, perpendicular to the curve at every point, right? So I can do that on either side. So with this guy, I'm going to offset it, and under distance, so again, if I wanted to change the distance of the offset, I would either click on it with my mouse, or I can hit D or type D on the command line and press enter. So now I've entered into like one of the options, and it's asking me for specific information. So now it wants to know what's the distance that curve is going to be offset. So I'm going to type in, I'm in 8, well, so I'm in feet actually. So I'll type in 0.5 to make a half-foot thick wall. So this is actually a massive space, but anyway, that's a half a foot. Maybe I'll type in 1. I'll type in D. I'll type in 1. So now my wall is going to be 1 foot thick wall. So that created an offset or a double line, just like when you're drawing a plan by hand, you create a double line that represents the thickness of the wall that you're cutting through. Let me delete some of this. Which actually reminds me, that's another thing that you'll come across is like, if I don't know how large something is, or if I want to change how large something is. So the way to actually measure this guy, there's a couple ways. One of them, the best way probably is just to type in distance. And distance asks me to trace out a distance. So I'll snap to the edge of one of my rectangles, and then I'll snap to the other end. And when I'm done, it'll tell me the orientation, and it'll tell me the length of that edge. Now, if I wanted to move that to a specified distance, there's a couple ways I could do that. Um, so there's a bunch of scale commands in Rhino. They're under transform. So I could scale the object. If I type in scale, you'll see here it's have scale 1D, scale 2D. If I just type in scale, it's like scale 3D, so it scales equally in X, Y, Z dimensions. If I wanted to make the room shorter but not narrower, I could use the command scale 2D, and then I could use a scale factor. So if I click, first point I click from is the center around which my object will scale. So for example, if I type in 0.5 to scale it by half, you can see it's scaling relative to wherever I clicked. It's like it's scaling back towards the original point I clicked. So I could scale it by half in that one dimension um, relative to an initial point. If I wanted to scale it to a particular distance, so I just scaled some weird number to another weird number that was half that original number. If I wanted to scale it to a certain distance, so I'll measure again. It's 45.57, some weird number. So if I wanted to scale it to 40 feet, I'll type in scale 1D again, and I'll snap to the original point that I want it to scale around. But this time, instead of scaling to a scale factor, I'm going to scale it to a certain dimension. So before I didn't click a second time, I just typed in a number. This time I'm going to click a second time. So I'll click at that um, top point of my rectangle. And you can actually see if you look at this little box down at the bottom of the Rhino window, it'll tell you what that dimension is. It's 45.57. So I'll click there. And so now what I would do is I would actually just type in the number of what I want that dimension to be. So again, if I wanted it to be 40 feet, rather than like clicking somewhere and getting some other weird number, I would just type in 40 in the command line and press enter. So now if I measure that, it should be. That's a way to kind of control the dimension of things. You can also measure other types of things. So I could select this, any closed outline I can measure the volume of. So I selected that rectangle and I typed in area. And so that's 2,700 roughly square feet. So that's another way of measuring. So back to drawing a room. If I were to offset this line, I'll offset it again to 1. Yeah, the other way you can modify curves obviously is by moving the control points. So I can select the endpoints there. Let's say I wanted to move the width of the room. So the distance of the width of my room is 65.8 feet, which is kind of weird. So let's say I wanted to make that 55 feet. I have already a double line, like an offset line. So I don't want to scale it because when I scale two lines like this, what I'm going to end up with, I did scale 3D there. That's not, I scale 1D, this guy, I'll end up with a change in the wall thickness as well as the overall dimension of the room. Not what I want. Sorry, hold on. Change my background color. There we go. So rather than scaling it, I could also simply move the control points uh, and resize the room that way. Now, like I mentioned before, the control points only show up automatically when you click on one object at a time. If I wanted to turn on control points for a bunch of objects at the same time, I can select them all. And over here on the left, there's a command called Show Object Control Points. I'll click on that. And now I can see the control points for both of those lines at the same time, and I can select them. So now when I click away or deselect the object, I don't lose the visibility of those control points there. So now I can select the control points of multiple lines at the same time. And so measure here, this is, and I can move stuff systematically. So I can type in the command move. You saw before I could drag things, but it's hard to do that at a specific dimension. So I can also move them to a specific. So my line before was 65.81. If I want it to be 55, I could click an original point that I want to move it from. And then rather than clicking another point to move it to, I'm going to type in the distance I want to move. So I'll type in 10.81. I pressed enter. So now that distance is locked in, but I have to choose a direction still. So I'm just snapping to ortho there, and I move it back. And now when I measure the distance, so I haven't changed the wall thickness, but I have resized my room. So control points are really useful for that reason. So let's say I wanted to draw a door in this room that I've just created. I'm going to draw a couple of lines. Just draw one line to demarcate where the door opening starts. So that's like a break in my wall. And I'll select that line and I'll offset it to create the width of my door. Let's say I'm drawing a 30-inch door. If I wanted to enter in a different dimension than feet, I can type in 30 and then the symbol quote symbol on my keyboard. So quotes means inches in kind of shorthand, and the single quote means feet shorthand. So if my model's in inches, I can do feet. I can enter dimensions in feet, or if my model is feet, I can enter dimensions in inches by adding that number. And you can see there it then switched back to like a much smaller offset, smaller door. Okay, so there's two lines that describe like the break in my wall for my door. Then what I would do, and now is where I'm going to start to line weight my drawing. So I'll make a new layer, and this will be like, I'm going to make a layer for each line weight that I want to use in my drawing. So I'll start with like my cut or my plan cut line. And I'm going to make these all different colors. That'll make them easier to tell what they are. So I'll make my plan cut line red. Again, nothing changed because everything's still on the default layer. So I'll select the outlines or the walls of my room, and I'll right click on my new layer and go change object layer. There's the outline, and then I could also do these lines. I'll put those on the same layer, but oops, you're right. But my line between those would actually be a lot lighter. In fact, in some cases, you wouldn't even see that because this is a door. You might just see the floor kind of continuing. So in that case, I would actually just trim. So I'm going to select those two lines that represent the break for the door, type in trim, and I'll trim away the walls between those lines to create the opening. Now I could also, if I wanted to show like a window, for example, and I'll just, I should explain this as well. So Control C on the keyboard in Rhino will give you a command copy to, right, copy to clipboard. So copy to clipboard is actually a command that you'll use to move stuff from one Rhino file to another. So in Rhino, you can have multiple files, multiple windows open at the same time. If you wanted to copy, say, a door from this file into another Rhino file that I had open at the same time, that's the command I use. So when I copy something to clipboard, and then I hit paste or Control V, it's just going to paste a copy in exactly the same spot as the original, which is less useful than the command copy. So those are two different things. So the hotkeys, the normal hotkeys for copy paste, are not the best way to copy things in Rhino. So what I would do to make a window, I would just type in the word copy. So the command copy is different from copy to clipboard. And I'll copy these two lines. I'm holding shift to snap to ortho, because again, it's important that those lines actually they actually touch the wall. For example, if I were to scale these back a little bit. And then, so they look close, right? If I'm zoomed out this far, I can't see that they're not touching, but if I try and trim my line now, It has no idea what I want it to do because they're not actually touching or going through each other. So just so you know, if your thing doesn't trim or split, it's probably because they're not actually touching, not actually. And so here, if I wanted to make a window, again with a window, you would see the bottom of the window frame. You'd see kind of, the frame, the window frame. So if I wanted to split this wall rather than trim it, I would just type in split, select the outlines of my window. So now within that window, I have separate lines, different lines. And in my layers panel, I'll make another layer and I'll call this medium. I'm just going to go medium, light, super light, whatever. I'll make this another color. And remember, so I'll select those two, change object layer. Oh, the other thing I neglected to mention, when you're selecting objects in Rhino, you can drag your mouse to the left, or you can drag it to the right, which produces different results. You can see there, when I drag it to the right, first of all, the window of my selection is a solid line. What that means is that the only stuff inside the line gets selected. So you can see just those lines that were fully within the window that I created got selected. When I click and drag in the other direction, you can see it creates a dashed line. And so this will select anything that's not just fully inside my window, but anything that my window touches. I'll select all that. And so when I click and drag that way, I get not just the lines of the window, but also the lines of the wall. Selection was touching. So like when I want to select something, that's big, I can just go like that. But if I went to the right, it wouldn't do anything. So that'll help you kind of select things easier. So I selected those two lines. You can also, by the way, select stuff. Oh, there's two lines there. Oh, so I can also select stuff by holding Shift. If I click on one of them, hold Shift and click the other one, I can select multiple objects. You can see I actually have double lines here. And when I click on a double line, it'll give me a little selection menu. It'll ask which one I actually select. In this case, I don't really know which one's which, but I'll just delete the duplicates. So I'll select those two lines and I'll put them on the layer medium. And now they changed color in my viewport and they are on that other layer. Now with the door, I would just trim. Oh yeah, by the way, you can see I have duplicate lines over here as well because when I go to select it up in the viewport, or sorry, up in the command line, it says two curves selected rather than one. If I again click it, so now I just have, and I'll trim that wall, make room for my, all right. Now to draw the door, I would use, again, the command offset to draw the door frame. So I'm selecting these lines that represent the ends of the walls. In this case, I don't need to actually join these lines. That's not really necessary. I'm going to leave them unjoined because that makes it easier to draw other stuff. So when I select this line, I'll type in offset and I'll make a door jamb that's like 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. So I'll type in quotes and I'll click to the side that I want the door jamb to show. Now I can also, when I draw this, use an option in the offset command called cap. And it's up there called cap. I can also hit A, enter on the keyboard, A. And inside a cap, I have a couple different options. I can say none, which is what I have now. That'll just make a new line at a certain distance from the original. I can say flat. What that does, you can see, is it connects the original offset line to the new line. So it offsets the line, but it also creates a closed outline. Really useful. And with those, I would actually, I'm not going to get into a ton of detail with drawing door frames because that's not what this is about. But with those, I would make them a different line weight because what you end up with is two lines that are so close together. If they stay, even though we're cutting through them like a plan, they stay close together, they'll just become one solid line, which will look like a really heavy line. So rather than leaving them on the layer that would technically be correct, I'll put them on the median, so they don't like end up competing with or sort of turning into one line with the wall effect. And then I'm going to go back. I'll set my plan cut layer as current, and I'll draw two lines and show that the ends of the walls independent of the frame of the door at the right thickness. So then I'm going to draw a door. So I could do that same way. I could draw a line and offset it with a thickness, or I could just draw a rectangle. Now, when I draw a rectangle, I can also choose the option 3-point. So I'll start somewhere, I'll end somewhere, then I'll set what the thickness is. So I'll go 1.5 inches. Press enter on the keyboard, and I can draw that in either direction. Door, I'm also going to make that lighter. And then to do a door swing, I'm going to rotate this door. So, typically in plans, you draw a door as open, and you also draw the direction that they move when you open. So I'm going to just rotate my door, type in rotate, and I just need to click on a point that'll be the center of my rotation. So I'll click on one edge on the side that I want to rotate toward, right? Really where the hinge is. And I can type in 90 degrees, or I can also hit shift or hold shift to snap to ortho. So I'll draw my door like that. The other thing that you typically see is like an arc, which represents the swing of the door. It represents, the path of the door as it's opening and closing. And that's just used to show whether or not like anything's in the way of that door opening. So over here on the left, I also have a command called arc. This one, I'll just use the default option. So center of arc will be that same point that I just rotated around. Start point will be where the door was, so perpendicular across. And then the end point will be where the door is. And so there's my door. And I'll put this on a new layer. So generally want to show door swings as pretty light lines, or you can show them as dashed lines. But it's better to show light lines. Dashes can get busy. So I'll make another layer here that's even lighter. I actually probably want to, well, try 3. All right, so there's a door. You could draw like in a normal plan, you'd have something going on in there, bottom of the door frame, door sill or whatever. In a window, we can do much the same way. So I'll offset frames. I'll draw a line that represents the pane of glass. That would be sufficient for a window right there. That's a very simplistic window, but you can, for our purposes, that's plenty. Now, we can also do furniture. I would recommend you just do kind of furniture of your own making. Now, I will say I think it's very important to get the dimensions of furniture relatively correct, because when you look at a plan, one of the ways you can kind of get a sense of scale from it is by the furniture, by the size of things that you are familiar with. So let's see here. One of the things that if you don't know really what the right size is, you just type in standard table size, standard table height, and go to images, and you'll find, obviously there's not one number that's totally standard, but you can get a sense of like, a 6 or 10 person dining table, certain size, right? And so I would draw, for example, a dining room table or some kind of table like that, just literally as some rectangle. Keep it as simple as possible. We want to be able to see what it is, but also, you don't have to spend time like drawing the edges of chairs and stuff like that. So this is 96 by about 42. And I'll go over here in Rhino, make a rectangle, type in 96 quotes for inches by 42. And furniture also goes on a lighter line. And then I can draw the chairs. So chairs are, in general, like 4 to 30 inches. Type in chair dimension. And we're just looking at millimeters. 16 and a half. Okay, a little bit off there. 16, let's draw like a, let's draw. I can also just hit enter twice to use the width for the length when I'm drawing a rectangle. All right, so there's one chair. So what I would do is place it just a little bit under, because right, like, show it like the chair is kind of pushed in, and then I would just select the rectangle. Now, when I'm copying this to make a bunch of chairs, there's a couple of tricks that'll speed you up that can also be useful for a lot of other things. One of them is obviously we just type in copy and we can go like this. And rather than try and copy it a bunch of times and get it close to the right dimension, when I copy it, I'll use the base point of the first chair as my start point, and then I'll use that same point on each subsequent chair to make them all evenly spaced. Now, if I wanted to put this in the middle of my table, I'll select them all, I'll type in move, or M, and then I can get the midpoint as a start point between these two middle chairs, as long as I have Smart Track turned on. So I'll show you that one more time. I'll type in move, and I'm going to snap to that corner. So now that's one of my Smart Track points. See it trying to project. I'll do the same with that one. And then I'll put my mouse right in between. And it'll show me the midpoint between those 2 points. That's my start point for my move. Now, there's another trick that's super, super useful. I use it all the time, which is if you want to lock in movement in a certain direction, I can hold shift. In my case, I don't think it would work, just the relative position of objects. I can hold shift to snap to ortho and then try and click on the actual point. Like I could get oops, too many Smart Track points going on. If I go to, where's my midpoint? There. So I could move it to the projection of my midpoint of my table. And that would work, that does work. But let's say I wanted to do it, in a way that's even easier. I'll type in move, I'll get that midpoint again. And then instead of finding the midpoint of my table and projecting that point, I'm going to snap to ortho and I'm going to hit tab on the keyboard. So what tab does is no matter, now that I've hit that button, I'm completely locked into the direction that it was moving when I hit tab. So no matter where I put my mouse on the keyboard, or sorry, on the screen, it stays moving in that direction along that line, right? Can't break off of that. I can also get out of that by hitting tab 2 more times, or just hit button. And so now all I got to do is I got to go in there and just click on the midpoint, because I know that I'm right on track with the direction I want to move them. And so there we go. I moved them to be centered on the table. Now to get them to the other side, I would just use the command mirror, which allows us to like reflect things. I'm clicking on the midpoint of the table. You can see we also have to like set a kind of mirror plane, or like line across which the thing is mirrored, holding Shift and Ortho. I would mirror it to the other side, and I can also type in to mirror it to the ends. I have to not only move it, but also rotate it. Sorry, copy it, but also rotate it. So I can use a command called orient to do both of those things at the same time. So I'll click on copy, the option copy, because I don't want to just move it. I want to actually make a copy of it. And again, I'm going to use the smart track trick to get the midpoint between those two edges. So that's reference point 1. So I'm also going to, like I said, change the orientation of this object when I move it or when I copy it. So I'll click just somewhere along the edge of my table for a second reference point. Now it's saying what target point, where do I want it to go? So I want it to go midway along the short edge of the table. And you can see the second reference point is going to be in order to change that orientation to the end of the table. And then when I'm done, I'll just press enter. That way I'll get out of that command. And with this one, I can do the same thing, mirror it across the long midpoint. And there's a table. We can also, like I would group this. So that way, even though they're not joined because they don't all hit the same points, I can still keep them kind of together and move them around and things. Select them all at once. That just makes my life easier grouping. And I can also ungroup stuff to get back out of it. Let's see. So the other thing, a couple other tricks that I would show you is, let's say I wanted to go in here and make another room within this larger room. So I could draw like a line here. This isn't really a good example, but I want to show you a command called extend. So if I had a line like that, and I wanted to extend it all the way to that wall, obviously I can select the control point and I can move it until it's touching, until it snaps. I can scale it to do the same thing. But a really super useful trick when drawing in 2D, and so a good example is a stair, actually. That's a good example. Let's draw a staircase to another level. So I'm going to draw kind of a rectangle that describes the overall dimensions of the stair. I'm not going to really measure it, but so there's a stair. Now stairs are usually 11 inches in run. So I'll draw a line that represents one edge and I'll offset it. And I'll type in 11 inches. Step is 11 inches apart. I'm going to turn cap off because I'm set it to none. Now it just makes one line. It doesn't make it a closed outline. Now I could do the same thing I did before, and I could just copy this relative to a previous snap, keep the spacing the same. There's an even faster way to do it, which is to use the command array. There's a few different array commands, and what they kind of do is they allow you to move and copy stuff, move and copy like multiple things at a time. For example, if I draw a line from the first tread, oh, sorry, I'm going to go back to where I had my line just like along the edge of my rectangle. And I'm going to draw another line that represents the overall length of the stair that I would see in this plan. And I have one line there, one line. So I can use array to multiply that line that direction with a certain spacing and with a certain number of steps and so on. So I'll type in array. That's the object I want to array. So normal array command is just X, Y, and Z. So this is actually a great example for those of you who might be drawing theaters. I draw like a theater chair, and I wanted to turn it into a grid of chairs. I could use the command array. And I'll say like there's, I don't know how many seats would be to a row, 10 seats to a row, and there's 12 rows. I don't want to use, so if I can copy it actually into a 3D like matrix of objects. I'm going to leave Z as 1 because I don't want to make like stacks. I just want to make rows and columns. Anyway, so I'll just leave Z as 1. It won't copy. And then it says unit cell or X spacing. So I'll click, and then I can actually, you can see I can make like a grid of chairs. That, right? And so I could click, or I could like type in numbers. Now you're seeing the number of chairs I have in each direction. Up there in the command line, I could always edit that mid-command. But so what's the thing? Do that one more time. So I could also enter some spacing, I think. Say like 3. 3 in one direction, and then I'm just going in the Y. So that would be like 4. And so it'll give you a preview of that. I can still go back and change that spacing. So it's 3 feet each chair, 3 feet apart that way. Each chair is 4 feet apart that way. So I can change the number and the spacing, whatever I want still. And if I'm happy with that, I'll just press enter. And that creates a grid of chairs. Easy. And we can kind of do the same thing with a stair. I'm going to show you how to do another type of array called array curve, which is actually super helpful if you have things that are along curved pathways. Actually, much like you kind of often have in a theater where the chairs are all slightly rotated to face towards a center point. But anyway, I'm not going to show you that, but I'll show you how to do these stairs. So if I type in array curve, I can array an object kind of along a curve as if it's like a path. So the relationship of this line to that line is important. And it'll say select path curve. I'll click on that. Now I can choose a number of items, or I can choose a distance. 7. Okay. Yeah, maybe the inch thing doesn't work. What's 11 inches? So 11 divided by 12.916. Array curve. That's my path curve. 0.916 feet. And so it'll just fill up that space for as many of that dimension it can fit until it gets to the end of the line. There you have it. That's a stair. Now, and they're all exactly 11 inches apart. Now we could also, what I originally wanted to show you, I wanted to make this stair wider. I can obviously move the control points, but I can also use this command called extend, which I find really useful in 2D drawing. So if I wanted to make the stair wider, I can move that outside line. Or for example, if I wanted to make it like a weird shape, kind of stair that had kind of a funky shape to it or something. Something like that. You will have that, but this is an example of what extend is really good at. So I'll click on the line that I want to extend all those lines to. I'll just type in extend. And it'll say select curve to extend. And I'll select all of them. Oh. Oh, you know what? I did it slightly wrong. So yeah, when you extend something, so you can see it extended them all until they were intersecting or touching that curved line. So just to explain what I did wrong there, if I type extend, I can extend the curve in this direction, or I can extend it towards my curve, my boundary, my extent. So when I selected all those lines before, I selected them kind of in the middle, and Rhino didn't know which way I wanted to extend. So when I go back and select them all on the side towards where my boundary curve is, then it knows, oh, it wants to extend all that, only in that direction. And so it worked at the same time. And when I'm done, I'll press enter. There you have it. So I could trim ends of the hair like that. Okay, and I think that's kind of it in terms of like 2D drawing, drafting techniques. Hopefully that gives you a good range of what's possible and how best to do things. The other thing I want to show in this is, like I've been explaining with our line weights, we're actually going to print this with line weights to a PDF. Now you can print stuff directly from your Rhino viewport, and that's useful in some cases, but in this case, I want to actually make a layout like I was talking about in the first video, because that allows me to scale my drawing and check that the line weights read at that scale, that they make sense, that they're not too heavy or too light. So when you draw in Rhino, I guess I didn't really mention this, you just draw full scale. You just do everything. If something's a foot, you draw it as a foot. And then you scale it when you either print or when you put it in a layout. So first thing is we'll make a layout. And down here where the little plus is next to all the viewport tabs, I'll click that plus and I'll click new layout. So in here, I have the option to set up a certain page size. Now, just in case you see millimeters here, you can change it that way. But also you want to make sure your units are in inches, because you'll be like trying to measure stuff and it'll be wrong. So if you go to units in the command line, the way you change what your layout units are is down here. Change the drop down. So our layout units are inches. So I'll click layout, or click the little plus and go to new layout. I can also just type in layout, the command line, and I get to the same place. Now my printer, you'll probably have an Adobe PDF option. I do not recommend you use Adobe PDF when you print from Rhino. It has problems, can have problems. Rhino now has its own PDF printer that works great. So just click Rhino PDF. When you click Rhino PDF, you'll get a bunch of default paper size options that come along with that. Most of the paper sizes we use will be one of these. So 24 by 36 is the standard one, 11 by 17, 8.5 by 11, etc. So if we wanted to, and we're going to kind of do these on 11 by 17 document. So I'm going to stick to an 11 by 17. I'm also going to make sure I'm in landscape there, so it's wider than it is tall. And I can also change this initial detail count. A detail is like a window where you're looking into your model space. So if I had multiple drawings and I wanted to lay them out on the same page, I could make multiple windows and I could position them. A window is exactly like a viewport, actually. I could position them over the part of my model space that I want to show. I could crop them with that, just like I would in InDesign. And I could kind of lay out a whole page with multiple drawings that way. Because I really just want to print this to PDF, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as one. And I'll click OK. And so down at the bottom, you can see a new viewport tab was created. On this, so the outline you see is the page. So that's 11 by 17, what I'm looking at right now. What was also created was what I was describing earlier, like a detail window. So I can move this, right, and I can crop it, just like in InDesign. I'm cropping my view into my model space. I can also like create them. I can detail, I can add them, I can lock them, I can scale them. So that's detail is what this is called. Type in detail. You can make a new one or So I can also delete this, for example. Now there's nothing. But anyway, so you kind of want to position the detail. Also, don't worry about the outline of the detail window. That's set by default not to print, so you won't see that boundary. Print it to PDF. Now in here, the first thing I'll do is set a scale for my drawing. And the way you set a scale for the drawing is per the detail window. Like I mentioned, if you had multiple details, maybe you had a section drawing next to an axon and they wanted to be at different scales from each other, you can set the scale of the window to just be at a different size. So I'll click and select the detail window. I'll go to properties and up at the top I have a bunch of different options here for different kinds of properties. I'll click on the one that says detail. And so now I can see here I can set the scale. So if I wanted to scale my drawing to 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, I would say 0.25 inches on my page, 1/4 of an inch equals 1 foot in my. That's all I got to do, and then it automatically scales it. And I can do any number of different scales. So the other way you can do is, in fractions, it's just like, 1/8 of an inch equals a foot would be, there'd be 8 feet per inch on my page, right? So I could also go 1 and 8/4 is half. So anyway, so that's how you set the scale. I would set it to a particular number. And the other thing that I can do, if I don't get it perfectly centered on my drawing here, I can actually go into my model space through my detail window. So I just double clicked in there. And when I do that, now I'm actually in like a viewport. So I'm not in layout space anymore, the viewport. When I move around, I'm moving my viewport there. And I could just position, so I can zoom in and out to wherever I want to look at. And I want to position it, centered on the drawing. And I'll double click again, just in an area where there's no object, so I'm not selecting stuff. Now I'm on the layout again. So I can go in and out of each window and adjust things. Did I actually get 1 to 4? Surprising. Anyway. All right. And so we can get it positioned that way, just using pan. So if I do zoom out, it will change that changed. Fix that. Now it's zooming. All right, so now we have it positioned, we have it scaled. The next step will be to preview our line weights. If I go in the top left of the viewport to the drop down, there's a little option called print preview. And if I click on that, it's like a toggle. So now it's checked. Nothing looks any different because I haven't set any print properties to any of my layers. So now as I go in and set some print properties, what you'll see is that rather than showing the display properties, for example, if I change the print color to black of this layer, now all those lines are black. Same is true for these ones. So I'm seeing what it's going to look like when it prints, not what it looks like in my space, right? It still looks like same colors and stuff in my. And I'll change also my line weights this way. So under print width, I can click and I have a whole range of different thicknesses there that are default. If I do really want something that's like between some of the defaults, like for example, 0.35 to 0.5 is kind of a jump, I can also type in 0.4 here. I can type in whatever I want. And so I've set different line weights to my lines. So now when I zoom in, you can see I actually have line weights. And just like I would do in a drawing done manually, I'd line weight my drawing so that things thicker or things cut through sorry, things closer to the cut or being cut through are the heaviest, and things further back are the lightest. And I can also type in zoom in the command line, or Z, and I can select the option 1:1. What that should do is it should show me my page at the same size as if I were to print it out on an 11 by 7. So in other words, the edge of my paper there should actually be 11 relative to my screen. And that, what's nice about that is I can see it at the same size that it'll be when it printed out, right? I'll know that. Yeah, like, so you can see what I meant earlier. Like when those lines are too close together, you tend to lose that resolution. 0.3, or sorry, if I went 0.6 on the medium line weight there, I would end up with a double line that's actually not really too thick, but eventually it'll just look like one big line, right? You don't want lighter. Okay. Now this is important to do to just check that your line weights make sense, and to scale it. That's what's really useful about the paper size. Oh, sorry, the layout. And now when I'm ready to print this thing, all I do is I type in print in the command line. I can also type, or sorry, I can hit Control P is the hotkey. Pretty similar to some other software. And I get a little preview here as well, so you can see the detail window outline is. And I just want to make sure I'm on print color there. I'm also going to choose output type. I'm going to choose vector output. And like we discussed when you guys used Illustrator, with vector output, that'll actually keep my lines as vectors. So they'll be like individual paths that if I needed to, I could edit them in Illustrator as well. I'm not planning to do that, but we'll keep it as vector output. For line drawings, that's what you want to really stick to. The other thing that will help if you are doing raster is you want to change the resolution to 300. 600, it's kind of crazy. You'll get large. You can also see if I didn't have print color selected, it would still be showing the display color. And when I go down to view and output scale, oh yeah, so under destination, I'm still on write a PDF. I want to stay on. Under view and output scale, I want to be on layout, and I want to be on my page, not one of my viewports, but my page that I created. And I also want to be on scaled 1:1. And this is scale to fit, which is already 1. And anyway, that way it actually prints to the exact size of the paper. You shouldn't have to change this, but just hit scale to fit if it doesn't work, or 1:1. And margins and position, you don't need to mess with that. You could kind of slightly shift things on the page, but that's all stuff that should be resolved when we create our layout. And when I'm done with those options, I'll click print, and it'll give me another dialog where I can select a location, and I'll just do this plan, and it should have created a PDF of there we have it. Now we have a PDF with that same size, got the line weights. Oh yeah, one thing you can do, which are sticklers for, you can actually see that where I've joined the line, it created a sharp corner. And where I didn't join the line, created like that's the end of that line, that's the end of that line. So when you line weight it, it creates like a thickness around the line, the path. So when I don't join it, it doesn't like join the corner or extend the thickness of the line to the intersection. One way to just avoid having to deal with that is when you print it, a little option under visibility. Huh. There's an option where you can change like what the ends of the lines look like, so they're like rounded, and if they're rounded, they'll just automatically joined. Huh. Where it is though. Well, anyway, it's not a big deal. I am not worried about whether or not they join each other. Anyway, I'll get back to you if I figure out where that. So I think that was the extent of this tutorial. So, oh yeah, one other thing I wanted to explain is you can also add text in the layouts. Now we're going to bring these diagrams into Illustrator, so I'll recommend that you can do it in Illustrator. But if I wanted to say, label some of the different rooms, the best way to do it is just to use the command text. There's some other text commands that you don't want to use for this. And you can always edit it. If you select it, go to properties and go to the text button, and I can change the size of it 1/8 of an inch. I can change the justification and paragraph or multiple lines. And you can move the stuff around. So you could add some text in your layout if you want. But for this, we'll just do it in Illustrator. But just so you're aware, the text command is the way to do it. So I think that's going to conclude this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one where we cover Illustrator.